Our program tonight is a talk by Audrey Taub of the SLO Beaver Brigade on beavers and why they matter. She'll be explaining how beavers can help make the Central Coast wetter, more resilient to floods, droughts, and fire, thus creating a more sustainable climate for birds and other wildlife. Audrey grew up on the banks of the Hudson River in New York State. After graduating college with a master's degree in mathematics from SUNY Potsdam, she moved to Washington State and became immersed in nature education and mentoring at the Wilderness Awareness School in Duvall, Washington. In 2005, she moved to San Luis Obispo County, where she lives with her husband and 3 children, tracking animals, gathering wild edibles, and swimming in the beaver ponds. She founded the SLO Beaver Brigade in 2019 after a discussion with friends about climate change. More specifically, they were asking themselves, how can we each contribute to climate regeneration? Audrey's answer was to focus on the work that beavers do as nature's best engineers to promote a healthy climate. So if you have questions during the talk, please put them in the chat, direct them to me, and we'll ask them for you at the end. So it is with great pleasure that I will now turn the program over to Audrey Taub.
Thank you, Judy, very much for that. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully. Where did my slideshow go? Here we go. All right. Does everyone see that okay? Yeah. Figured you'll tell me if anything stops here. So beavers and why they matter. So briefly, what I'm going to go over is pretty much the history of beavers on this continent, some basic beaver facts, and some benefits they have for us. What's happening new in California, some obstacles in our area, and what we've been up to. So beaver hats pretty much wiped out practically the population on this continent. In North America alone, there was estimated to be upwards of 400 million beavers, and that is astonishing. The number was reduced to just about 100,000. So it was almost completely wiping out beavers from our continent. And that means beavers were in every half mile of our stream, there were beavers. So you can imagine how wet this continent must have been prior to European contact. So if all the beavers go away, you could imagine what would happen to the wetlands. This is an interesting slide that at one of the visitor centers in the Elkhorn Slough shows the wetlands in 1780, and that's already long after the beavers are gone. And from 5 million acres to 450,000 acres in California remaining. So this is the historic range of beaver in California. And this was published in 2013. So up until that time, they've thought the beavers were in a much limited range. I don't know if you can see the dotted area, but it's a much smaller area. And there are some current beaver locations that we know about in SLO County. So all along the Salinas River, Pismo, and down in Arroyo Grande and Oceano. From the last floods of last year, there was a beaver spotted on Old Creek in Cayucas. So that was kind of exciting to see a beaver in an entirely different watershed. It was a historic event last year. So some basic beaver facts. So beavers are a lot like people. They mate for life and they live with their families. So they have kits every year. Typically in our area, they have 2 kits and the average is 2 to 4, but they can have as many as 8 in a very abundant landscape. And the adults grow, beavers grow their entire lives. So the older they get, the larger they get. And they're typically 50 pounds, 50 to 60, but they can get upwards of 100 pounds. And they're super awkward on land. If you see a beaver on land, very rare, but they are very slow and very round, which is why they want to be in the water, where they're more like an otter or a seal, very graceful, very hard to catch. And so they build dams to keep themselves safe. And they're semi-aquatic, and they're just built for the water. I love this photo that Donald Quintana took at one of our beavers in Atascadero. You can see kind of the webbed feet. Their back feet are just larger than my hands, and they're completely webbed. So they're like having flippers on. Helps them swim really fast. And the broad tail not only helps with danger, but it's like a rudder. It helps them steer. It's also a little bit of a kickstand. So when they stand tall to reach up to grab willows, they're able to lean back on their tail. And when they're underwater, there's a clear eyelid that covers and protects their eyes, and so they can see underwater. And they just eat the vegetation around the beaver ponds. So their favorites in our area are willow and cottonwood, and they eat that inner cambium layer of bark. And if you come on a walk with us, you'll see we'll typically find some beaver scat, and it's like little marshmallows of sawdust on littering the bottom of the pond. And you can't really see in this picture, but they have bright orange teeth that is hardened with enamel. And so it helps keep their teeth sharp, because the enamel is stronger than the back of the teeth. So with every bite, they're actually wearing the back out quicker than their enamel. So beavers build dams. So this is one of the dams in Atascadero. It did wash out last winter, but at the time of these photos, it was over 100 feet long, and you can just see how much water is impounded behind the dam. So the dams just slow the water down and giving it time to sink in. And you can see the riparian area around the ponds just gets so lush, even in the really hot Atascadero climates. So to give a more detailed overview of what a beaver does, on the left side of the screen, it shows a dry, our more typical landscape where the water, the creek is deeply incised. The water is way below the ground level, the surface level of the ground. And the water table too is way down low. And what a beaver will do is move in and build a dam. And once the dam is in, it starts to catch sediment. And it catches sediment from upstream, and then it slowly raises the bottom of the waterway so that it starts to reconnect that water to the floodplain. And so as it's raising that floor, it's also widening the channel. And then additionally, they want to get to the trees all along the water. So they'll dig. They're really proficient diggers, and they dig these channels perpendicular to the river, and it starts spreading the river out to where you really can't tell where's the main stem of the river. And if you see at the bottom, it shows kind of where the water table is. And as the water is slowed down and spread out, it starts raising the water table. So that's how a landscape can go from really hot and dry. And this photo was taken in August in 2020 in Atascadero. And the photo on the left, same day, it's just at the beaver pond. And you can see the green, lush wetness at the pond. So 5 to 10 times more water is stored underground than above ground. So if you think of that photo with a big surface area of those ponds, imagine what's being stored underground. So additionally, each dam acts as like a coffee filter. And it's by slowing the water down, it allows those heavier pollutants to just sink to the bottom of the pond. And additionally, the vegetation in the dam will catch these pollutants and absorb them. So this, I love this photo. This is the Sharps Fire in 2018. And you can see this waterway continues all downstream from this photo, but it's only the beaver habitat that stays green and lush during the fire. Because of that, so much water is being stored underground, so all that vegetation stays very lush, even during the wildfire. So this is going to be where the animals go during fire to stay safe. And this is going to be where the plants start to return. And Dr. Emily Fairfax, who's been studying these beavers in the Salinas, she wrote a paper called Smokey the Beaver, and studying like, wow, when she saw this photo, she said, wow, is that a fluke or is that something you can count on? And she looked at a dozen mega fires in the West, and she said, okay, it's something you can count on, and published that paper. So another important benefit the beavers provide is not only creating wetlands that store carbon, but just their act of chewing. They'll take a tall tree and chew it down, and that tree that has evolved with the beavers, the cottonwoods and the willows, will sprout like 4 to 10 more sprouts. And then there's that many more trees available to pull the carbon out of the atmosphere and lock it in the wood. And those young growing sprouts, because they're actively growing so much, they're pulling out way more carbon from the atmosphere than one older tree. And additionally, they're taking that wood and sticking it into their dam or sticking it into the pond where it's getting locked and buried underground. This is some really cool photo from thermal imagery from a photo of the dam in Atascadero, and it shows the temperature, the reds being in the 90s and the blues being in the 60s. So you can see how the temperature really varies. Even when it's really hot outside, there's cool pockets that are really important for the fish. And additionally, as the water evaporates, it's cooling the air. And you can really feel it when you visit a beaver pond, especially on a hot day like we have in Atascadero. It could be 100 degrees on the walk out to the pond, and then you just feel so refreshed once you get there. And beavers and steelhead, this is it's an amazing story how they've just coexisted together for millennia. And beaver ponds, they provide the place for the steelhead to get big enough to make their journey out to the ocean. And one study in Oregon showed that a BDA restored stream increased the juvenile steelhead survival by 52%. And that, I just think, is astonishing. Here we have a species, the southern steelhead recently listed as endangered. And here's one act that can increase survival by 52%. And it's just astounding. And they also followed one particular steelhead as it traveled back upstream, and it made it over 200 beaver dams in Oregon. And so this wondering of, oh, do beaver dams stop steelhead from returning to their habitat? Well, no, beaver dams and the steelhead have evolved, and beaver dams are very leaky. There's water running around it. There's water running through it. And if you ever visit a dam and you stop and listen, you'll hear the trickle. It's not like a man-made dam that doesn't allow the water in. And this just shows, and that's where that I'm not exactly sure where the saying came from that beaver taught salmon to jump, but you can see how they've evolved together. And beavers and birds. And one thing, it's fun, it's so fun taking the birders out to the beaver ponds because we see so many things. Like I think the last time there was like sleeping great horned owls right above us and just not too far above us even. And we always spot so much life and activity. Today we got to see an oriole and just beautiful birds, green heron and the killdeer calling our attention. And these are the red-winged blackbird nests. And some of our game cameras have just, 6 or 7 or 8 male wood ducks in a row. And you just think, oh my gosh, they're so shy. I never really walk up and see a bunch of them like that. But these beaver habitats really create such great habitat for birds. One of the birders called it the riparian Serengeti, and I really liked that. So beavers increase the wetland perimeters by 575%. So you can know that like the corridor, that the edge effect, is greatly enhanced. And that's why they're considered a keystone species, where they are creating this habitat that other species need. And we have the game cameras that Dr. Emily had put out on the beaver ponds in Atascadero, and they identified 61 species of birds. So I want to point out that this game camera is pointed at the dam. So we're not getting hawks, we're not getting birds that stay at the treetops, the swallows and the swifts and those sorts of birds. We're getting the birds that come to the ground, the ducks also. And still there are 61 species of them at one game camera. So what do beavers do? They slow down the water, they spread it out, and they let it sink in. And this increases the groundwater quantity, improves the water quality, creates that fire refugia, and it stores the carbon. I think of the problems we face in California, and it's like droughts and floods and fire. And I think of what are beavers good for, and it's like droughts and floods and fire. It's just such a great thing for us in our arid climate to have these animals doing the work that they're doing. So, of course, we can't mention beavers without mentioning, there are ways to coexist. Beavers like the same habitat we like. So, of course, there could be a culvert that a beaver will dam up and think it's a leak, or a road that is flooded, or a tree that someone doesn't really want the beaver to eat. And the great thing about this is all these concerns can be mitigated. These have been figured out eons ago on the beaver by the Beaver Institute on the East Coast. They've been living with beavers much longer than we have, and they have figured out and really perfected these ways of dealing with keeping a pond at a certain height, or keeping a culvert from getting blocked, or from your favorite tree, or from your vineyard from being eaten from a beaver. So in California, last year was such a big year for California because let's see, California Department of Fish and Wildlife has been in charge of lethally removing beavers whenever there is a beaver problem. And now they have really made a 180-degree turn and are promoting beaver-human coexistence. So you can't get a beaver lethally removed without at least first trying and documenting all the ways you have tried to coexist with this beaver. And additionally, they've, for the first time in 75 years, have relocated a whole beaver family. And this is a photo of them relocating that family in Northern California back in December. And CDFW is committed to doing 2 more pilot relocations this year. And they've opened it up to, if you have property or a location that you want to relocate beavers to, there is a form you can fill out and get on probably a pretty long list of potential relocation sites. And looking at that form is a good thing, a good idea to see, well, what are they looking for? You have to have the right habitat. You have to have enough food for a beaver, and you have to be well enough aware or have your neighbors on board with having beavers around. And they're developing a management and restoration plan. And this week, Assemblyman Connolly from, I think, Santa Rosa introduced a bill, AB 2196, to codify the beaver restoration program. And it will also expand the relocation program to allow other organizations besides California Department of Fish and Wildlife to do relocations. So it's a very exciting bill, and hopefully it'll pass this week. So what are the obstacles? I think of really the obstacles as being a lack of education. Right now in our area, along the Salinas River, I think there's just almost a tradition of driving in the river. So beaver dams get driven over quite often. So a really lack of education around what the beavers are doing. And there really isn't an awareness that there are things you can do to work with beavers. Once you have the desire to live alongside beavers, there are tools available, and we can help out with that if you have a problem with beaver on your property. There's also some places where there are invasive species that are choking out the willows and the cottonwoods, and they aren't edible to the beavers. Phragmites on the Salinas River is what I'm speaking to right now. And there's a good mile stretch of what looks like it could be good beaver habitat, but because of the invasive species choking out the food for the beavers, they pretty much ignore that whole mile. And our rivers and streams are pretty degraded. So, and when I say that, I mean like almost deeply eroded and incised to where the plant vegetation, the roots can no longer reach the water table. So there aren't a lot of vegetation surviving through the summers. And this is one of the things we've been doing when we have people driving through the river, is caution taping it all off and having a sign. We walked through the tracks one day, my daughter and I, and we just picked up all the dead fish in the tracks of the vehicle that went through the river. We counted 108. So what have we been doing? Education, education, education. One of the things is the Beaver Festival. We've had our 2nd annual Beaver Festival in March at the SLO Mission Plaza. And we'll be having another one next year, our 3rd annual on March 29th. So get that date in your books. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, we had a great speaker series this past year to give our other organizations opportunities to talk about what they're doing to steward our waterways. We've really been elevating the importance of our watersheds and empowering the river stewards, the people who love their creeks and rivers, really kind of bringing them together and letting them get to know each other. And we all kind of stay in communication. A lot of the work we've been doing has been on the Salinas River. We're going to have a volunteer beaver dam monitoring starting this fall, or starting really when the beavers start to complete dams along the Salinas. And that's really getting more help protecting the dams along the river from vehicle access. One thing we learned last year is that when we do put up the caution tape and put the signs, vehicles do, for the most part, go around. Yeah, I would say for the most part, they will do that. So that's kind of, we want just more dams protected, because what we have found is that the beavers will tend to have to rebuild the same dam over and over again, rather than what they want to do is build a series of dams where one beaver family could maintain 4 or 5 or 6 dams. And you can imagine how much more water they store when there's more dams, how much more intensity a flood would be reduced if it had that many more speed bumps along the way. So we want to increase the amount of dams each beaver could have. We're also collaborating with Drinkable Rivers, which I'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide. We're giving 2 free tours every month to beaver habitats. I highly encourage people to come out. I mean, we really watch people be, a little skeptical about beavers, and then we take them into a beaver pond and they're like, oh my gosh, I get it. I get it. I see what I can see. I take in with all my senses what the beavers are doing. We also have river cleanups. There's a new mural at the Charles Paddock Zoo. And we're collaborating with Ecologistics on a Salinas River Center in the Atascadero that we're super excited about. Here are some signs that we've put up. These signs are on the Dianza trailhead to the Salinas River in Atascadero at 2 different entryways. And the Drinkable Rivers is an effort that was started in the Netherlands by Lee Ann Fell, and she created this river, this idea as a really kind of jump-starting our imagination. It wasn't that long ago when all of our rivers were drinkable, and yet now that just seems almost laughable, nobody even thinks to drink a river. But what a really simple way to explain, like, to a young child how healthy your water is. Can you drink it or not? Are we moving in a direction of drinkable? And it's just become a really powerful teaching tool and getting people engaged in watershed health. And this is a photo of the Elkhorn Slough Visitor Center that we visited. A couple of allies to this river center we're trying to create here in collaboration with Ecologistics. And we're super excited about really elevating the importance of the Salinas River. It's really such an amazing watershed, starting here in San Luis Obispo and ending at the Monterey Marine Sanctuary up in Monterey Bay there. So it's important. You think of all the farms along the way. It's a really valuable watershed, and yet a lot of people drive on it and don't realize the importance of this waterway. And San Luis Obispo is the festival, and there's a couple of BDA projects in the works, one on Johnson Ranch and one on Bishop Peak. We'll be doing some education and stewardship on those places. And in Morro Bay, there was just a seminar at Cal Poly talking about some challenges that coastal communities face with sedimentation and seawater intrusion, and the potential for restoration along these areas. So the things you can do to support beavers is get involved. I think there's, I think before I started the Beaver Brigade, I really thought, organizations are out there protecting the watersheds. They know the state of the plants and the fish. And really, you know your area really probably better than the organizations because you can visit it regularly. You get to see and have a real relationship. So I really want to encourage people to become the stewards and empower them to recognize that their involvement is really important to the health of the water. And what they notice and what they see is really valuable information. So really get involved. We have a lot of ways to do that, mostly right now in the Salinas River, but we absolutely want to spread to other creeks and rivers in the county. Obviously, don't drive over dams. Well, maybe not obviously, but but yeah, we want to keep our vehicles out of the riparian area. And definitely come out on a beaver tour. You really makes all the difference when you're there. The Beaver Festival is available every year. And then if you have creek running on your property and want some restoration, definitely give us a call or make a donation because right now we're gathering shovels and waders and vests for our volunteer cleanup crew. So I am available for questions.
All right, Audrey, thank you so much. What a great talk. I have a couple here. One is from Nancy, and she wants to know, why are our beavers nocturnal and eastern beavers diurnal?
Yeah, well, I can make a couple guesses. I think they've learned to be nocturnal here because they have a better survival rate. I also suspect that beavers in a river system are more susceptible to predation. So in a lake, I know when I go visit my sister in Colorado, and I can watch the beavers in a lake during the day. They don't seem to be as worried. Whereas here, they definitely are not coming out in the daytime. So I do think it, and I do think they're worried about people. I think that being harassed by people during the day is what sends them into hiding.
Would you talk a little bit more about BDAs? You mentioned them, but I don't think a lot of people might know what you're even talking about.
Yeah, right. Yeah, of course. So there is a restoration technique, a process-based restoration, which means, hey, let's increase the health of the watershed enough so that the normal natural processes will do the heavy lifting, will do the work for us. So one of those processes is where there aren't beavers is mimicking beavers. So humans making beaver dams. And that's what a BDA is, a human-made beaver dam. And typically it's like just like lasagna, layering up the layers of a sediment, leaves, twigs, the same things, that branches that a beaver would use to build up a dam. So you get some effects of having a beaver in a stream. And the hope typically is that a beaver is going to move in and maintain it, because then you have a very well-developed dam with 24/7 maintenance for free. So that's certainly the ideal reason you're wanting a BDA. But even if there isn't a beaver moving in, you get some of the benefits. You start waking up these remnant channels and increasing, catching sediment, catching the runoff from any pollutants that might be coming downstream. And all those you can imagine would help Morro Bay estuary.
Nice. So can I go back to your talking about the AB 2196? Is that being introduced in the full assembly this week, or is it being introduced in committee, or has it already gone through committees and now it's going to the full assembly?
Yes, it's already passed unanimously through committee, and this week it should be going through the full assembly. That's my
So we should be
understanding.
calling Dawn Addis's office.
Yes.
and asking for
Saying,
her.
yes, yes, support 2196 Assembly Bill. Yep.
Okay. So there's a question from Bob. Is there a plan to try and survey the beaver population locally and maybe even in a wider area?
There is a plan. Yeah, the timing, I'm not really sure. It'd probably be around the fall that when we would start doing surveys. But we would definitely need volunteers, and it will depend on how many volunteers we have to see how much area we can cover.
Mhm.
Yeah, but we absolutely want to be saying, we have, X number of families of beavers in our county. That would be great to know. Great information.
Well, this has been great. We've been hearing
Mhm,
about beavers for a number of years, but I think your talk is really focused on how these are truly a keystone species.
mhm,
And for this organization that has the particular interest in birds, we realize that habitat is important, and what these animals are doing is building habitat for birds, and it's free.
mhm.
I think that's what we have to really realize is we have allies in the animal world, and we need to protect and encourage rather than poison and decimate. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I agree. And what's interesting too is um like they're a keystone species. They're also what is called like a cultural keystone species because this isn't actually new information. It might be new to the Western world, but there were indigenous peoples that had stories and mythology around not killing beavers, and that there were some tribes that would not do it, and they had ceremony and ritual around beavers where their identification is tied up. That's where the cultural keystone idea is about. And typically the plains area, the Plains Indians area, because in those arid climates, if there's a drought and their beavers are getting harvested, then the people won't survive. So studies have been done about how um, the Plains Indians really knew this relationship with the beavers. They also understood that the habitat, that rich, lush habitat, pulled in the deer, the antelope, the buffalo, and all of that also helped them to survive. So I find it really fascinating that it's great that all this science is coming to light and all this was already known long ago.
Mhm.
If we really learned from the people who lived here when we all arrived here or our ancestors came. So it's just an interesting bit of information, and the scientists have been studying now what the natives knew then.
Right. Are you looking at doing developing school programs that you can go into the schools? Because it seems to me that, your pro issue of cars driving in the
Mhm,
Salinas, you really need to address via getting to the kids.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a big plan of ours. And we have been through Oceano Community Service District, we have been teaching public school kids in Oceano. And we have spoken to Atascadero Unified School District, and they're super excited about doing programs with us. So yeah, we're just kind of getting everything, all our ducks in a row to do that, because we agree that is exactly what we want to do. That's kind of the long-term vision of changing behavior is, educating the children so that, yeah, there won't be the desire to drive in the river.
Right. So
Mhm.
we have a question from Arturo about what are the potential challenges or downsides of increased beaver populations in certain areas? And is the goal to be back at the few hundred million mark, or has the habitat changed too drastically since that point?
Yeah, well, I think the goal is to be moving in that direction of having more beavers. The land can definitely use more water and storing the water on the land. I don't know. I haven't heard like, oh, we want this number, because a lot of beaver habitat is now, housing developments. And so we certainly, understand we don't want our homes to flood. So there is going to be more of working with the tools, the management tools, so that beavers can be back in town, and we can keeping a pond from getting too big by having a pipe leveler in there and a pond leveler, and so that these devices can allow us to have some level of control of flooding, so that we can get some of the benefits of having beavers, but not have to, relocate our homes and towns either.
So I'm getting another question about if there's an estimate of the beaver population in SLO County. And I think you answered that before, saying
we don't really have an estimate. We have 3 families in Atascadero, and there's 1 in Templeton, and then there's 2 in Paso, so we're slowly gathering the how many families, and each family has, anywhere from 4 to 8 beavers. So we're gonna come up with an estimate given the number of families we have.
So Kate wants to know, what happens if the beavers are in a creek that doesn't run all year long?
Well, typically what we've seen is that even in waterways where beavers are, where they don't run all year long, their water will stay where the beavers are, because when they build the dam, it holds the water on the property, allows the water to sink in and raise the water table. And that is what we've seen, is that there's water all year long where the beavers are.
Interesting.
Yeah. I know it's hard for people to believe that. That's been one of those things, like, well, when you tell me, I hear all the time that the Salinas, there's no water in the Salinas. And, come on a walk with us and you'll see. Come in October when it hasn't rained for 6 months, and stand waist deep in a beaver pond and tell me there's no water in the Salinas. It doesn't make sense.
I love it. Well, that's the last of the questions that I'm seeing. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to thank you, Audrey, for a great presentation on beavers. And I look forward to, at some point, getting to see the beaver ponds.
Yes, that'll be wonderful.